Hello everybody, this is News Reporter Jack reporting to you live from Harlem, New York with the news. And today we're going to look at the question, why did Africans sell each other into slavery, or how did Africans become slaves? So we're going to be studying that today in Mr. Antonio's class. We're reminded of Galatians. It says, God shall not be mocked. They're studying that in school too. I see the groundhog is here, and he just disappeared into the ground. So we have something here. It's not going to be nice. And as you can see in the studio today, I also have a lion in here. Very scary. Let's go to Mr. Antonio's class. Okay, I'm sorry about that, everybody. I should have spoken a little bit sooner. And, well, today we're going to learn, how did Africans become slaves? Or why did Africans become slaves? And that's what we're going to learn about. And just remember that this is a part of your African American heritage. It's nothing to be ashamed of, because in actuality this was done by Europeans and other Africans too. So, you have a question? Calvin has a question, everybody. So let's listen to what Calvin's question is. I have a question. Okay, look, Mr. Antonio. My cousin, Delray, he's here. He's from Africa, but he told me that white people snuck up on other people in the jungle, and that's why they're slaves. That's right, they snuck up on people and stole them. That's what happened. Well, no, that's not quite what happened. So, I'm going to tell you what happened, but before I do, remember Galatians, in the book of Galatians it says, God shall not be mocked. Whatever a man soweth, that he will reap also. So, let me tell you about what happened and how Africans became slaves. During the era of the transatlantic slave trade, Europeans did not have the power to invade African states or kidnap enslaved Africans. Because of this, between 15 and 20 million enslaved people were transported across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa and purchased from traders who enslaved people throughout Europe and European colonies. There are still many questions people have about the triangular trade. And I say triangular trade, slave trade, I'll tell you what that means. They sold goods during this time, such as would motivate Africans to support the enslavement of people, and this is why slavery was so interwoven in a lot of Africa. Here are some of the answers to explain some of the questions I had. One thing that many Westerners wonder about Africa's enslavers is why they were willing to sell their own people. Why would they sell Africans to Europeans? The simple answer to this question is that they did not see enslaved people as their own people. Blackness as an identity or marker of difference was at that time a preoccupation of the Europeans, not Africans. There was also in this era no collective sense of being African. In other words, African traders of enslaved people felt no obligation to protect enslaved Africans because they did not regard them as their equal. So, How many people became slaves, you may ask? Some enslaved people were, well, you may ask, how did people become slaves? I'm sorry. This is what we were talking about today. Some enslaved people were prisoners of, and many of them also were seen as enemies as the people who sold them and captured them. Others were people who had fallen into debt. Enslaved people were different by virtue of their social and economic status, what we might think of today as their class. Enslavers also kidnapped people, but again, there was no reason in their mind that they saw the enslaved people as their own. Another reason that Africans enslaved other Africans was they were willing to sell off their brothers or sisters. Africa also, well, anyway, let me explain to you this. Africans was that they felt they had no other option. A lot of Africans felt they just had no other options. As the trade of enslaved people intensified in the 1600s and 1700s, it became harder not to participate in this practice in some regions of West Africa. The enormous demand for enslaved Africans led to the formation of a few African states whose economy and politics were centered around raiding for and trading of enslaved people. States and political factions that participated in the trade gained access to firearms and luxurious goods that could be used to secure political support. States and communities not actively participating in the trade of enslaved people were increasingly at a disadvantage. The Mosai Kingdom is an example of a state that resisted the trade of enslaved people until 1800s. The Mosai Kingdom was not the only African state or community that resisted enslaving people and selling them to Europeans. The King Congo Alfonso, he was the King Congo Alfonso I, who had converted to Catholicism, well, he was a Catholic, tried to stop the sale of enslaved people to Portuguese enslavers and traders. He lacked the power to stop it. However, he tried to police it or try to stop it through making certain that wouldn't happen in his own kingdom, and as well as many of the nobles who were engaged in the African selling of African. So let me tell you what this guy did. Alfonso tried to write the King of Portuguese, asking him to stop the Portuguese traders from engaging in the practice of selling or capturing slaves, but his pleas were ignored. The Kingdom of Benin, or the Benin Empire, offers a different example. Benin sold enslaved people to Europeans when it was expanding and fighting many wars, which produced prisoners of, well, they sold their prisoners of war. Once the state stabilized, it stopped trading enslaved people until it started to decline in the 1700s. During this period of increasingly instability, the state resumed participation in the trade of enslaved people. In other words, when their kingdom things started to go bad in their kingdom, they started to go back to selling slaves again to make money. It might be tempting to assume that African traders of enslaved people did not know how bad European plantation enslavement was, but they were not naive. Not all traders would have known about the horrors of the Middle Passage or the lives that awaited enslaved Africans, but others at least had an idea. But they simply did not care. There are always people that are willing to be ruthless, exploit others, and the quest for money and power. But the story of the trade of slaves in Africa by Africans goes much further than a few bad people. Enslavement and the sale of enslaved people were parts of life. The concept of not selling enslaved people to willing buyers would have seemed strange to many people until the 1800s. The goal was not to protect enslaved people, but to ensure that you and your family were not reduced to becoming a slave. Africans were also very smart, and Africans knew how to live off the land. Now, when European diseases infected Africans, they knew how to dig roots, eat certain vegetables to cure themselves, whereas Native Americans or indigenous people did not have that skill. So when they got European diseases, many of them fell ill. Now remember the Bible verse I was talking about in Galatians, that God shall not be mocked, that whichsoever a man soweth, he reaps also. If you look at Africa and the condition that it is in today, there are many tragedies. A lot of Africans gave their lives, and also they sold out for wealth and power, at least what they thought was power. Europeans came along and took over their lands and took their resources. So slavery led to a lot of bad things for Africa in the long run. But the African continent and the countries of Africa are starting to come back, and they're really making great grounds. I shouldn't say that it's starting to come back, but they're doing pretty good right now. Does anybody else have another question?
Yeah, this is Ori, and I just want to say something. Today I learned that it was Africans and Europeans working together to enslave Africans, and that Africans sold people to Europeans. And I also learned that the Africans didn't think of each other as like we do here in the United States, where we're all Americans. No, they didn't think of each other like that. So that was part of the reason why they sold people to Europeans. And they sold it to make money and to get power. Wow. So Africans and Europeans, or white people, were both bad. I didn't know that.
Well, that's right. Africans and Europeans worked together to get people to the United States, South America, the Caribbeans, and slavery was a very brutal, mean thing to do. So, glad we went through that, and thank you for your comment, Ari. So, next week we're going to learn something different, but I want you guys to have a great day and a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.